Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my profound honor to rise today to speak to my private member's bill, Bill C-243. Before I begin, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Senator Pierre-Hugh Boisvenu and also Senator Denise Batters. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to my esteemed colleague, the member from St. Albert, Sturgeon River. My thanks to them for all their tireless dedication and work on Bill S-281. That was the earlier version of this legislation. It laid the groundwork for what we're discussing today. Now, Bill S-281 was lost when Parliament was prorogued, but its spirit and purpose endure in my Bill C-243. Mr. Speaker, this bill is dedicated to the memory of the late Brian Illicik. Brian was just 35 years old when he was murdered. He was described as a devoted father, a loyal friend, and a cherished son. This callous crime unfolded just after midnight on June 15, 2012. It happened when Brian and three others, Michelle Shigalski, Eddie Rajano, and Matthew Sherman, were working as armored car guards. They were employed by G4S Cash Solutions and were servicing ATMs in the Hub Mall. The Hub Mall is a food court on the University of Alberta campus in Edmonton. Suddenly, their co-worker, Travis Baumgartner, turned on them. He shot and killed Brian, Michelle, and Eddie with point-blank gunshots to the back of their heads. After shooting his co-workers, Baumgartner locked them in the vault behind the ATM and fled in the armored truck. It was a cold-blooded act of violence that shocked students and rocked our community. Edmontonians have seldom witnessed anything so brutal. Miraculously, Brian's colleague Matthew survived, but to this day, he lives with life-altering injuries. Brian's 12-year-old daughter, Kania, was left without a dad. She will grow up with fond memories of her father, but that's all she'll have. Memories. She will never have her father at her side when she graduates high school. Her father won't be there on her wedding day. Her children would never know their grandfather. Mr. Speaker, every father lives to be there for such precious occasions, but death has robbed their family of these precious moments. In 2012, this savage murderer was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 40 years. It was the harshest sentence delivered in Canada since 1962. There was some justice in this tragic story, or so we believed. The sentence correctly reflected the depth of the suffering he caused. 3 people murdered in cold blood. 1 person disabled for life. However, a Supreme Court of Canada ruling in 2022 overturned a law passed by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The law had allowed judges to give consecutive sentences in the event of multiple murders. Brian's murder ended 3 lives in a horrendous, heartless act. But due to the court's decision, the man who killed Brian could now be eligible to apply for parole in about 12 years. Brian's parents, Mike and Diane Illicik, will now have to decide far earlier than expected whether they'll attend a parole hearing for the man who callously murdered their son. And it gets worse, Mr. Speaker. As it now stands, if a convicted murderer applies for parole and is denied the first time, he or she could apply for another parole hearing just 1 year later. Think of the trauma that Mike and Diane would face in that situation. It would emotionally scar them. It would bring back horrific memories of their loving son's senseless murder. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-243 seeks to right that wrong. It stands for justice. Justice for Brian. Justice for his family. Justice for every victim whose voice was silenced too soon at the hands of a murderer. Following the Supreme Court's ruling in 2022, Mike and Diane bravely spoke out against the decision. And they've repeatedly spoken out, not just for their son, but for every family member that has suffered at the hands of a cruel killer. Diane said she and her husband felt deflated by the Supreme Court's decision. That's understandable. She went on to say that she and her husband had lost faith in the system. The system failed them. Mr. Speaker, I've recently spoken with Mike and Diane. They're a true testament of strength and resilience. While discussing my proposed bill, they told me, and I quote, "This bill would certainly lessen the trauma that victims go through before, during, and after the parole process takes place. Avoiding frequent trips for the purpose of attending parole hearings would assure victims and that the perpetrators of the crime remains contained in jail." They are pleading, Mr. Speaker, that all politicians across party lines will answer their prayers. They told me, please tell your colleagues this. The bill supports all victims left behind. Parole hearings tend to be emotionally draining. Please stop the process of having frequent parole hearings. Please have the House of Commons approve Brian's bill. Mr. Speaker, Mike and Diane said it so eloquently. This bill is about protecting victims. This bill recognizes the horrific heartache families have gone through, and it aims to protect them. Currently, convicted murderers can apply for parole each and every year after having served their minimum sentence. That means that each and every year, victims' families could come face to face with their loved one's murderer. Victims' families have to endure this every year to stop these murderers from getting parole. Can you imagine facing the murderer who killed your son every year, having to face them each and every year? The person who killed your daughter, the person who killed your best friend, the person who murdered your mother. Murderers simply should not be able to re-victimize the loved ones of their victims at parole hearings. Mr. Speaker, Paul Bernardo is another notorious murderer who's plagued our nation. He kidnapped, tortured, and killed 15-year-old Kirsten French. He kidnapped, tortured, and killed 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. The lives of these two young women were cruelly snuffed out. Mr. Speaker, Bernardo has had 3 parole hearings to date. His first hearing was in October 2018. He was rightfully denied. His second hearing was in June 2021. He was once again denied. His third hearing was in November 2024, denied again. That means that the French and Mahaffey families attended 2 parole board hearings for Bernardo in less than 3 years. That's outrageous. The families of Bernardo's victims have been open and honest about the pain the parole hearings have brought them, and it serves to illustrate how painful it is for anyone in this country to have to face the murder of their loved ones. Mr. Speaker, I want to give a voice to Kristen French's mother, Donna. This is what she had to say about these repeated parole applications. And I quote, "It seems that just as the ink has dried on our previous victim impact statement, Doug and I have to muster up the strength to prepare a second statement. This is a painful and difficult process, as there are no words that can capture the depth of our loss, anguish, and despair. I will also share these powerful words from Donna. And I quote, "For those who say that time heals, they don't know the excruciating pain that comes from such a horrific loss. Time doesn't heal the pain. The pain is a life sentence." Parole hearings for multiple murders are likely far more common than many Canadians would believe. Let's look at a small piece of the dark history. Between 2009 and 2010, the Parole Board held 23 full hearings for people convicted of multiple murders. As of 2011, there were 4,420 offenders serving life sentences for first and second degree murder. Of those, 421 killed more than one person, and of those, 95 were out on full parole. And we're in a country that most of the world believes is safe. And it gets worse. Between 2022 and 2023, there were 199 parole hearings where victims gave impact statements. Mr. Speaker, I read a Public Safety of Canada report from 2010. The report stated, and I quote, "Families of a homicide victim appear to feel a sense of responsibility to be present to represent their loved ones. Some families have expressed the view that their presence is essential. This is so that their loved one is not forgotten in a process that is largely focused on the offender." The report continues, "It is therefore a burden on victims that presently hearings for those life sentences and indefinite sentences can apply for parole." Mr. Speaker, we as a country must do better for victims. My bill will spare scores of families from suffering, from enduring additional frequent pain in the justice system. Again, this bill would mean murderers would only get to apply for parole every 5 years after their first denial. Our justice system needs to protect families. Families should come first, not murderers. Bill C-243 will take common sense action to protect grieving families. With this bill, Brian's parents, Mike and Diane, will not have to face the monster who killed their son every year. In my view, and in the view of the majority of Canadians, the current process makes a mockery of justice. I want to give my personal thanks to Mike and Diane for being so brave and so forthcoming in their support for this important piece of legislation. I sincerely hope and pray my fellow parliamentarians on both sides of this House will support this piece of legislation. Please do it. Do it for Mike and Diane.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain. Thank you for that help.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. I know he was a journalist in his former life, as I was in my former life, and in that role you get to know a lot of victims of crime, and I appreciate the heart that he brought to this legislation and the intent behind it. I too know some of the victims that he has spoken of today. And I wonder if he has any concerns that this bill, as it's written, may violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and therefore may not pass muster when it comes to the Supreme Court of Canada. As he's mentioned, when we talk about consecutive terms, that was thrown out by the Supreme Court at one point. Does he have concerns about this? And if so, what would be his remedy?
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not about to do lawyers' work here or judges' work. I think that this bill comes from a place of the heart. We need to recognize the pain of these victims. Can you imagine? I have to admit I choked up even reading about some of the thoughts from Mike and Diane. Having to face that monster every year, the same person coming before you, and you have to relive, and I can well imagine you'd probably not sleep at night in the weeks leading up to the hearing. I would imagine that you would feel tense, you would feel tearful, and I've gotten to know this fine couple, and you know, the very fact that the fact that they are willing to be so brave and stand up and also bring up the memories of their son. I think it's so admirable. So I just beg the members across the way to please get on board with this. It's up, excuse me, it's up to courts to decide the law, but let's rule from the heart on this one.
L'honorable député de Gaspésie-les.
The honourable member for Gaspésie-les-Îles-de-la-Médane. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Edmonton, Griesbach, for his speech and for the testimony he brought to this place. My question is, it's hard to understand the pain and suffering of the victims in a case like this, and especially where they have to appear before the parole board. Is there any thought given to limiting the number of applications that can be made to the parole board, to limit the number of these hearings and experiences? Is there a way that the loved ones could make their submissions known without having to appear in person?
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach.
I want to thank my colleague for the question. Well, I think the whole intent of this bill is basically to do that, to accomplish that. Instead of coming every year after year after year, it would mean that they would only have one shot every 5 years. And you know, whether somebody appears live or by video or any other way, it still brings up that awful feeling, those awful feelings, and really just puts them through sheer hell. So I think this is the ideal bill that would solve that whole issue and you know, help victims for once, put victims ahead of murderers.
We have only a minute, so very briefly, the honourable member for St. Albert Sturgeon River.
Mr. Speaker, just following up on the question posed by the member for Hamilton Mountain, I would note that someone convicted of murder receives an automatic life sentence for good reason, and that with respect to the statutory review provided for in this bill, it's one that Parliament has already decided upon, and it's in the Corrections and Conditional Release Act that there's an automatic review every 5 years. That is the time that Parliament determined to be the appropriate time frame, having regard for the gravity of the offence of murder and the fact that it is an automatic life sentence. Is the member aware that that provision of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act has been struck down by the court? And if not, why would this bill be harder compliant?
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach has only a few seconds, please.
That's why he's a lawyer. I'm a former journalist. Thanks to that member there.